Welcome back to DPReview TV viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and you may have heard that, yes, indeed, DPReview.com is shutting down. And if you haven't heard that, well, I'm sorry, that probably just came as quite a shock to you. You should check out this video here. We explain everything about that. So please do stick with us through this process because there's still lots of good stuff to come. And because we are winding things down, we wanted to do things with more nostalgia, take a look back at the past. And that's what we're doing today. Jordan and I are going to talk about our 5 favorite pieces of gear that we have reviewed over the many, many years that we've been with DPReview. So I'm going to start things off, but I think it's important to just talk about the fact that I have reviewed many different pieces of gear. So it's not stuff that I'm necessarily using day to day. A lot of it is just going to be gear that I fell in love with, or maybe surprised me, or had interesting stories to it. But I do want to start off with a piece of gear that I actually do use day to day, and that is the Olympus EM1 Mark III / OM System OM1. Now, I mentioned both the Olympus and the OM System cameras because, to be honest, they are very similar in a lot of ways. And it was really the EM1 Mark III that I first fell in love with, this system of being rugged, portable, but having all these computational photographic technologies that actually worked and simplified my process. And so when I was out shooting fishing videos for Bower Trout Fitters, that's when I first fell in love with the EM1 Mark III. And then naturally when the OM1 came out, which was basically just an improvement, but very similar in regards to what it can do, well, then I naturally moved over to that.
All right, it's Jordan here, and for obvious reasons, my list is going to be a little more video-centric than Chris's, but I actually wanted to kick things off talking about some of the photo cameras that I found really inspiring, starting with the Fujifilm X-T3. It was just such a huge jump forward for them, and I loved using that camera so much. It was actually kind of my family photo video camera for a few years, but in terms of just sheer joy using something, the Leica Q2 is right up there for me. Just beautiful ergonomics and that lovely 28mm fixed lens. But there's one that captured my heart even more. While Chris was sick, I was terrified that I was going to have to review the Fujifilm GFX 100S by myself, but the week that I spent shooting that camera is actually some of the most fun I've ever had taking pictures. Anytime there's a new GF lens that comes through, the first thing I want is a GFX 100S so I can get back to enjoying shooting stills with that camera.
So my number 2 is not something that I'm going to work with every day. In fact, I don't think I'll ever be able to touch this lens again, but I'm so surprised how much I fell in love with it, and it makes no sense. It's the Canon RF 20-70 f2. See, the fact of the matter is, I'm always the one going around saying, oh, you don't need to get expensive stuff. I mean, I'd prefer f4 zooms. That's fast enough. I want more versatility in my focal range. And here we've got a lens that is gigantic, has a crazy wide aperture, doesn't have a very extensive focal range. And I just loved it from the first minute I used it. It is ridiculously expensive. It is super heavy. It is gigantic on your camera. And yet I tried to justify it by saying, oh, it's like having a bag of primes all in one lens. I mean, isn't that great in the long run? It's so much easier to carry. That's bull. But whatever it is, I just love the images that it made, the sharpness, the bokeh. It's really one of those things where logic be damned, it makes no sense. It's like that amazing affair that you have on vacation. It's like, well, if I brought that thing back home with me, I'd probably end up really hating it and just being totally regretful. But instead, I look back with these fond, sexy memories.
I have been filming Chris reviewing cameras for well over a decade at this point, which is as exhausting as it sounds. And for most of that time, I've had my video camera perched on top of a video monopod. I used a few different versions of the Manfrotto ones, but I was never really thrilled with them. And then one day, Gerald Undone, just like an angel, came to me and said, you really need to check out the iFootage Cobra 2. It is a world's better monopod, and it's reasonably priced. So sight unseen, I just ordered one, and it has changed my life. Well, not changed my life. Anyways, my life is better now that I have this. Just a very stable monopod. I can put any size camera on it, and it's still working great like 4 years later. Okay, so now between the time that we recorded the video you're watching and when it actually came out, iFootage released the Cobra 3 monopod, which is actually even better than the Cobra 2. It's got like this pedally thing. It's a lot of cool stuff. Anyways, it's better than the Cobra 2, and we will be doing a full review of it on Petapixel in the future.
There's this interesting facet to reviewing cameras for over a decade like I have, and that is you're playing with so many different cameras, but they're not necessarily made for you. And so you got to look at them objectively. You got to review them based on what a lot of other people might like. And sometimes you get cameras that have serious flaws or strange designs or just don't fit you, but you still love them in spite of those flaws. But once in a while, it does feel like a camera is actually made just for you. Well, for me. And in that regard, it's actually the Sony a7R5. We reviewed Sony for many years, and they have had flaws absolutely over the years, but the a7R5 really struck me as one of these cameras that's finally come together that seems to fit what I would personally like. And so I actually ended up falling in love with it. For my kind of stuff, this is actually an amazing camera. Probably my favorite Sony body that I've used to date. With the Sony a7R5, its limitations didn't really affect the kind of photography I like to do, and its benefits were just like perfect for what I like. But in the end, I do have to send it back. It's going to be a sad day, and I will. And you know what? I'll just be moving on to the next camera, and the next camera after the next camera of that. That's just the way it is.
So every once in a while, I get the opportunity to review a video lens. And the views aren't great on these, but it's something that I just have so much fun doing. And I have shot with like a Leica C Summilux cinema lens. I've used all kinds of Laowa cinema versions, but one truly captured my heart, and that was the Vazen 28mm T2.2, an anamorphic lens that's so cool I dedicated an entire review to it. It's just extremely small, but still has a really expansive 1.8 times squeeze factor, which gives you this very distinctive anamorphic look. It really didn't have a lot of optical flaws, and I just loved shooting with that. It was a dark day when I had to send that thing back.
Okay, next I have to talk about Leica. First off, I just want to say all the things that people complain about, that they're way too expensive, that they're frivolous toys, that they're completely impractical for most photographers. I do largely agree with a lot of that. I absolutely get it. And I was the first to say for so many years, like, those Leica files, and they're, running around with M4s and M3s and just really enjoying that. And I was like, no, they're bull. I'd never enjoyed it. And you know what? It's finally taken to, I guess, 2023 for me to finally admit that there's something that I do really love about them. It started with the Q2 cameras. I mean, they're so nice to carry around. They're an enjoyable experience. And when they made the Q2 monochrome, I was like, yeah, done. I'm in love. That's great. And then I used the Leica M11, and I've never really enjoyed the rangefinders. Although I've had fun experiences, I've never until that point used one where I'm like, you know what, I could actually see myself using this. And then it finally actually boiled down to a complete reversal and return to their roots using the Leica M6 with film in Wetzlar, Germany. It was such an enjoyable experience. And it's just that first moment where I was like, okay, I finally get it.
When I was getting ready for this episode, I went and looked back at some of our earlier episodes when we first switched to DPReview, and I was thinking, the longevity on this one tool is absolutely incredible. It is the Atomos Ninja 5. Now, I'm not sure the Ninja, the Samurai, all that, if that's cultural appropriation or if it's just whimsical naming. I don't really know. But one thing I do know is years after this was released, I'm still using it all the time. If I need to capture raw video or a camera's interface, it's still extremely useful. It's had a bunch of major firmware updates over the years, so it's actually a much more intuitive device now than when it first shipped. It's getting regular firmware updates to make sure that you have support for all of the latest cameras when they're coming out. And it's not a bad little monitor to boot. And this is one of the best investments I've ever made.
Okay, so for my final piece of gear that I really loved looking back over our history at DPReview.com, it's actually the Fujifilm X100V, which was, interestingly enough, our highest viewed ever video on DPReview.com. It did amazing. And I'm going to admit, I never liked the X100. Ask anybody who knows me, they'll agree. Like I always said, it's sexy over substance. That 35mm focal length in the face. I mean, I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't get it. And I thought there were better cameras out there. And yet, finally, playing with the X100V, it just resonated for me. I love the look of it. I love the feel of it. I like the new film modes. I had a great experience with it. That focal length still, that can burn in hell. But everything else about the camera was so good that it even made me overlook that. You know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, it's like I never liked Olympus, and I started using them for work. Didn't like big giant zooms. Now there I go. It's my favorite. I didn't like Sony cameras for the longest time. Bad Ninjas, whenever they finally fixed all that. Oh man, I didn't like Fujifilm X100s. Now it's my favorite. Hated Leica. Now I'm feeling, you know what? This whole history of DPReview.com has just been this revelation of all my prejudices and getting over them. This is a redemption story.
My favorite product that's been released while I've been at DPReview. I'm just taking full credit for the creation of it, even though if you look at the timeline, it doesn't totally make sense. But anyways, story is I was in Japan right after the GH5 was announced, talking to Panasonic engineers, and I had a Sigma 18-35 f1.8 on a speed booster attached to that. And, it doesn't give you much of a wide angle, but it got you kind of like a semi-wide to normal, but really bright. It was like a bag of primes, something Chris has already said in this episode. And I said, can you just give me a first-party thing like this? And they did one better. They brought out the 10-25mm f1.7.
Sigma 18-35. You've always made me so happy. Where would I be without you? Whoa. What's this? It's over.
Now, not only do I love the fact that we've got a very bright lens with all of the things I love in a video lens, we've got a mechanically coupled focus ring, we've got a stepless aperture, the breathing is very well controlled, but this was also the first lens that started my love affair with the ultra-wide to normal zoom, and we're starting to see a whole lot more of those. The Panasonic 20-60, and very recently, the Sony 20-70 f4 that is also one of my favorite lenses ever released. It all started with this thing, and I still use this every day.
So from Jordan and myself, thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed this little blast from the past, this look back at our experiences at DPReview.com. And there is still way more to come. Fear not, there's still a lot of content coming out as we take a look back, and it's going to be fun and it's going to be silly and you're going to enjoy it. So please stay tuned. Leave your comments below. Absolutely, we'd appreciate that. I guess don't subscribe to the channel. This is not that important anywhere, but hey, like this video. We would absolutely enjoy the affirmation. Our socials, you can still follow 2 out of the 3 that you see below. Those are still not going anywhere, so please do follow us there. But otherwise, thanks so much for joining us, and I promise we will see you very soon for another episode of DPReview TV.